Millionaire calls cleaning. Lady liar for saying daughter was seal. Then froze when the unit stormed. Hayes had always been a woman of few words. In her world, action spoke louder than anything she could say. She didn't belong to the world of high society banter or wealth, nor did she care to. She had lived a life shaped by harsh realities where loyalty, strength, and duty were the only things that mattered. Her life had been defined by the rigid discipline of being a Navy SEAL, a life of courage, secrecy, and sacrifice. But now here she was, scrubbing the floors of a wealthy businessman's home, tucked away in the shadows of a world so far removed from her own. Her days spent serving a family who didn't even recognize her value seemed like the perfect metaphor for her life, often overlooked, but always necessary. Rosa, the cleaning lady who worked for Mr. Conrad, had always been quietly observant. She had seen more than her fair share of secrets over the years. The subtle exchanges between Jessica and her father, the way Jessica would sometimes disappear for long stretches of time, her distant air when she returned, it all added up. One day, as she dusted the living room and listened in on the quiet hum of conversation, Rosa heard something that made her pause. A name, a place, a reality that didn't fit in the plush world of Mr. Conrad's mansion. It wasn't a mistake. She had overheard Jessica's conversation with a soldier, one who spoke of the past with a familiarity that seemed too deep to ignore. The way he mentioned her training, her call sign, and her role in covert operations, it all clicked into place. Jessica wasn't just a privileged girl. She was someone far more dangerous, someone who had lived a life of honor and sacrifice, one that had taken her into the heart of battle. Without thinking, Rosa blurted it out to Mr. Conrad, who had always treated her with a mix of indifference and aloofness. "Your daughter? She's a Navy SEAL," she said, her voice carrying an authority she rarely showed. Her words hung in the air, charged with something Mr. Conrad hadn't expected. He looked at her, his face freezing in disbelief. His world was one of power, control, and money. A daughter who had served in the military? Impossible. Not someone like Jessica. She was a reflection of his success, a piece of his own image molded by wealth and status, not something as rugged and raw as the world Hayes had once inhabited. "You're lying." Mr. Conrad's voice was cold, dismissive, cutting through the air like a blade. "My daughter would never have been involved in something like that. She's not a soldier. She's—" He trailed off, struggling to put the words together, but they were meaningless anyway. The idea didn't fit into the box he had created for his daughter, his family, or his life. Rosa didn't flinch. She had seen much worse than the disbelief of a man who couldn't understand the world beyond his own. "I'm not lying," she said firmly, keeping her gaze steady. "She is." Mr. Conrad's expression hardened as his eyes narrowed. He couldn't even begin to fathom how something so incongruent with his reality could be true. Rosa's words, though spoken quietly, had caused a ripple in his carefully constructed world, and that made him angry. It was easier to dismiss it all, to believe that this was just some misunderstanding from a woman whose job was to clean his house, not to understand the intricacies of his family's life. He didn't see it for what it was, a revelation. Rosa quietly returned to her task, her hands continuing their work, but her mind was racing. She wasn't one to meddle in other people's affairs, but she knew something was wrong. The soldier's words echoed in her mind. Jessica was part of something bigger than this world of polished floors and expensive decor. She had been, and no matter how hard Mr. Conrad tried to deny it, that truth would eventually come to the surface. For days, Mr. Conrad's mind kept returning to those words. His initial reaction had been one of disbelief, but as time passed, doubt began to creep in. He thought about the years he had spent building his empire, pushing his family aside in pursuit of wealth, thinking that success could fill the gaps. He had barely spent any time with Jessica over the years. He had never asked about her life outside of the family business. Was it possible that his daughter, the woman he had always seen as a reflection of his own ambition, had secretly been living a completely different life? Jessica had always been the quiet one, the one who kept to herself. She had never been as vocal as her peers about her accomplishments or her struggles. She rarely spoke of her experiences, only ever sharing bits and pieces when the mood was right. But Rosa's words had struck something deep inside Mr. Conrad. Was there a chance that he had missed something? Something far more important than the career he had built for her? Jessica had always been strong, But was she strong enough to survive the brutal world of the military? Was she in fact hiding a life he would never understand? The more Mr. Conrad thought about it, the more he questioned his own ignorance. Had he been too focused on creating a perfect image of his family, one that fit the mold of success, to realize that Jessica's strength came from a place far deeper than he could ever comprehend? For days, Mr. Conrad stewed in his own thoughts. He had to know the truth. He had to confront Jessica. He couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease that had taken root inside him. And yet, he struggled with the idea of admitting that he had been wrong. It was a battle of pride and responsibility, and it was beginning to tear at him. Rosa had planted a seed, and it had begun to grow. But Mr. Conrad wasn't ready to face what it might sprout into. He kept his distance, unsure of how to approach the situation, and yet in the back of his mind the question lingered. Was his daughter truly capable of something so remarkable, or was it all just a fabrication? The days that followed were filled with a quiet tension. Mr. Conrad couldn't shake the conversation he had had with Rosa. Her words echoed in his mind at odd hours, whispering in the silence of his office, clawing at his consciousness during meetings, and even in the dead of night when sleep eluded him. The idea that Jessica, his only daughter, could have been a part of something so dangerous, so demanding, shook him to his core. It seemed so incongruent. His mind raced through every interaction with her, every moment that should have been a sign. But he had missed it all. How could he have been so blind? For years, he had molded Jessica into the daughter he believed she should be. She was polished, educated, poised, everything he thought a child of his should represent. And yet, beneath the surface, there had always been something else, something he could never quite grasp. As a father, Mr. Conrad had been so consumed with the success of his career, with his wealth and the future of his family's name, that he had never considered the possibility that Jessica's path might not be the same as his. He had assumed that her silence, her occasional aloofness, was just a phase, a reflection of the pressures of being a part of his world. He hadn't questioned it, he hadn't cared to, but now Rosa's words had planted a seed that began to sprout with a quiet urgency. Could it be true? Could his daughter, the quiet, graceful woman he had always seen in the confines of his luxury-filled home, be a Navy SEAL? It seemed almost impossible, and yet the more Mr. Conrad reflected, the more plausible it became. He realized how little he truly knew about her. The work, the training, the discipline, it wasn't the life he had ever envisioned for her. In his mind, Jessica had always been the embodiment of comfort, privilege, and privilege alone. But in his heart, something told him that Rosa's words had weight. It was strange, this feeling. It was a mixture of denial, doubt, and an unfamiliar sense of guilt. The guilt of a father who had never bothered to understand the complexities of his child's life. The guilt of a man who had been so wrapped up in his own ambitions that he had failed to see the person his daughter had become. Was it possible that she had been living a life he had never known? That she had been carrying the weight of something as monumental as being a Navy SEAL, and yet never once felt the need to share it with him? The more Mr. Conrad thought about it, the more confused he became. How could Jessica have kept such a significant part of her life hidden from him? Had she not trusted him enough to confide in him? Or had she simply chosen not to share it, believing that he wouldn't understand? It was a question that gnawed at him, pulling at the fabric of his identity as a father. Every conversation with Jessica now seemed like a missed opportunity, an unasked question, a moment of disconnect between them that had only grown over the years. That night, as Mr. Conrad sat in his study, staring out at the dark sky, he made a decision. He had to confront Jessica. He couldn't keep living with the uncertainty. He needed to know the truth to understand what his daughter had truly been through. He couldn't go on pretending that everything was fine, that he knew her like the back of his hand, because in truth he didn't know her at all. The next morning, Mr. Conrad asked for Jessica to meet him at the mansion. His tone was firm, but there was an undertone of something else, an urgency, a need for answers. When Jessica arrived, her expression was unreadable, as if she had expected this conversation for some time. She had always known that her secret would eventually come to light, but she hadn't expected it to happen like this. She hadn't anticipated her father's disbelief, nor the emotional weight of the moment. Mr. Conrad wasted no time. His voice was steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "I need to know the truth, Jessica." "Rosa," she said something. About you. Something I don't understand. Jessica stiffened, her eyes darting to the floor before meeting his gaze. She had never been good at hiding her emotions, especially from her father. What did she say? Her voice was quiet, almost cautious, as if she was unsure whether to confront the truth or hide from it. Mr. Conrad's jaw tightened, and he continued. She said you were a Navy SEAL. Is that true? The words hung in the air between them, thick with disbelief and confusion. He was struggling to reconcile this new version of his daughter with the one he had known all these years. Jessica stood there, silent for a long moment, as if weighing the weight of the truth. Then slowly she nodded. Yes, it's true. I was a Navy SEAL. The words hit Mr. Conrad like a blow to the chest. He couldn't believe it, yet he couldn't deny it either. Jessica, his daughter, had been living a life of danger, of sacrifice, and he had known nothing about it. He felt a lump rise in his throat as he tried to process this new reality. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was barely above a whisper, filled with hurt and confusion. Why keep something like that from me? Jessica's face softened with a mixture of regret and sorrow. I didn't want you to worry, she said quietly. I didn't want you to see me as just a soldier. I wanted you to see me as your daughter. I wanted to be someone you could be proud of, not someone who put herself in danger for a living. I knew you wouldn't understand. The admission hit him harder than anything he had heard in years. It wasn't just about the military. It wasn't about the fact that she had been a Navy SEAL, the kind of elite soldier who had seen things most people couldn't even imagine. It was about the distance between them, the silence, the unspoken words. Mr. Conrad's mind swirled with confusion and guilt. He had always wanted his daughter to follow in his footsteps, to rise to the heights of success in the way he had. But now, faced with the reality of her strength, her sacrifice, he realized how little he truly understood her. He had spent so much time focused on his own empire, his own achievements, that he had failed to see the true measure of his daughter's strength. She hadn't needed his approval. She had done it all on her own. And in that moment, Mr. Conrad realized how much he had underestimated her. I never knew, he said softly, his voice breaking. I never knew what you had to go through, what you've done, and I should have been there for you. Jessica stepped forward, her eyes softening. It's not too late, Dad. You're here now. In that instant, something shifted between them. The walls that had always been there began to crack, and Mr. Conrad could see his daughter not just as the image of wealth and success he had created in his mind, but as the person she had truly become, strong, resilient, and full of a courage he could no longer ignore. The conversation with Jessica had left Mr. Conrad shaken, his mind whirling with questions that no longer had easy answers. He had always prided himself on being a man who could control everything, the course of his business, his wealth, even the lives of those around him. But this was something he couldn't control. The truth of Jessica's life, her secret existence as a Navy SEAL, had hit him like a sudden violent storm. It was a storm he had never expected, one that left him feeling small, powerless, and more disconnected from his daughter than ever before. That evening, Mr. Conrad found himself in his study again, pacing back and forth, his thoughts tumbling over one another in a chaotic mess. The weight of his guilt pressed down on him, heavier with every passing minute. He had spent years building an empire, focusing on his business, his success, his own personal legacy. But in doing so, he had ignored the most important thing: his family. His daughter had lived a life that he had never understood, a life of sacrifice, courage, and hidden strength. And he hadn't known a single thing about it. How had he missed it all? How had he, a man so used to reading people, to understanding the motivations of those around him, failed to see the truth about Jessica? She had been living in a world so different from his own, one that was dangerous, grueling, and filled with unimaginable challenges. And he had been blind to it, dismissing her silence, her distance as just another part of growing up in his world. But now, in the wake of this revelation, everything seemed so clear. The way she had always been so composed, so reserved, the way she had always kept her emotions close to her chest. It wasn't aloofness or coldness. It was the result of a life she had lived in secret, one that had shaped her in ways he had never fathomed. As the hours passed and the night deepened, Mr. Conrad's thoughts continued to spiral. He had failed as a father, and the guilt of that failure was suffocating. He thought back to all the times he had prioritized his work over spending time with Jessica, All the weekends he had missed, the birthdays and milestones he had overlooked, the moments where he could have been there for her but had chosen his career instead. He had been so obsessed with building an empire that he had forgotten what it meant to be a father. He had taken for granted that Jessica would always be there, that she would always be the image of success that he had crafted for her. But now looking back, he could see the cracks in that image, the cracks that had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface. Mr. Conrad's mind drifted back to Rosa, the cleaning lady who had started all of this. He had dismissed her words so easily, so arrogantly at first. She had been nothing more than a servant in his eyes, a person who cleaned his floors and did his bidding. He had never bothered to see her as anything more. But now, in the quiet of his study, he realized that Rosa had been the first to see the truth about Jessica. She had recognized something in his daughter that he had failed to acknowledge. Rosa had been the one to speak up, the one to shatter the perfect world Mr. Conrad had built around his family. And in doing so, she had forced him to confront the painful reality that he had been neglecting his daughter for years. The guilt swelled within him, a constant reminder of how far he had fallen short. He could feel his own shame eating away at him, and he knew there was only one way to begin to make it right. He had to change. He had to be a better father, a better person. He couldn't undo the years of neglect, but he could try to make up for it now before it was too late. With a sudden determination, Mr. Conrad stood up and walked to the phone on his desk. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed Jessica's number, his heart pounding in his chest. When she answered, her voice was calm, almost distant, but he could sense the underlying tension. She was waiting for him to say something, something that would either mend their fractured relationship or drive them further apart. "Jessica," Mr. Conrad began, his voice tight. "I need to apologize for everything. I've spent so much time focusing on myself, on my success, that I've completely ignored you. I've failed you as a father." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, Mr. Conrad wondered if Jessica had hung up, if she was too angry or hurt to speak to him. But then she spoke, her voice soft yet filled with the kind of wisdom he had never expected from her. "You don't need to apologize, Dad," she said. "I've always understood why you did what you did. I know you were trying to build something for us. But it's not about the money or the house or the business. It's about being there for each other, and we haven't been there for each other." Her words hit Mr. Conrad harder than anything he had expected. It wasn't anger that he heard in her voice, but understanding. A quiet understanding that made him feel even more guilty. Jessica, despite everything, despite the years of distance, was still willing to forgive him. She was still willing to meet him halfway. "I've been so focused on what I thought was important," Mr. Conrad said, his voice breaking. "But I see now that I've been blind to what truly matters. You, your life. I should have been there for you, Jessica. I should have known." Jessica's voice softened, and for the first time in a long while, Mr. Conrad felt a glimmer of hope. "It's not too late, Dad. We can start over. We can rebuild our relationship. But it's going to take time." The sincerity in her voice was enough to calm the storm in his chest, and he realized then that he wasn't beyond redemption. He could change. He could be the father Jessica deserved, but it would take effort, patience, and a willingness to confront the mistakes he had made. In the following days, Mr. Conrad took the first steps toward healing. He began to spend more time with Jessica, learning about the life she had led outside of his world. He listened to her stories about her time in the Navy, the missions she had undertaken, the challenges she had faced. And with each story, he saw her in a new light, no longer just his daughter, but a woman who had lived through unimaginable hardships, who had faced danger head-on, and who had come out stronger on the other side. It wasn't easy, this journey of reconnection. There were moments of awkwardness, moments when the weight of the past seemed too heavy to bear. But slowly, through their shared conversations and moments of honesty, they began to rebuild their bond. And in the process, Mr. Conrad learned that strength wasn't just about what you could build with your hands. It was about what you could rebuild with your heart. Days had passed since Mr. Conrad's conversation with Jessica, but the words she had spoken to him kept reverberating in his mind. It wasn't so much the fact that she had been a Navy SEAL, though that alone had left him reeling, but the realization that she had carried this secret alone for so long. The realization that his daughter, who he had always thought of as sheltered and protected, had been living a life filled with danger and sacrifice. The weight of it was almost too much to bear. At first, Mr. Conrad had believed that this revelation would change everything, would shatter the image he had of his daughter and expose a life too foreign for him to understand. But the more he tried to comprehend it, the more he began to see it differently. Jessica's life as a Navy SEAL was not a contradiction to everything he had thought of her. It was an extension of the strength, resilience, and discipline she had always shown. In fact, it was a revelation that illuminated just how much he had underestimated her. As the days passed, Mr. Conrad made a concerted effort to spend more time with Jessica, to really listen to her, to understand the woman she had become. They had dinners together, quiet evenings in the library, and conversations that stretched late into the night. He was no longer just trying to get answers. He was genuinely trying to know her, to reconnect with the daughter he had never fully known. And what he learned from those moments was not just about her military career, but about her character, the strength of her spirit, the depth of her loyalty, the way she had never asked for anything from him, but had always been ready to give everything to those she loved. One evening, as they sat in the drawing room, the silence between them grew comfortable yet heavy. It was then that Jessica spoke again, her voice low but steady, the words carefully chosen. "There's something else, Dad," she said, her eyes meeting his with a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. "Something you need to know, something I should have told you before." Mr. Conrad, who had been leaning back in his chair, sat up a little straighter, his heart skipping a beat. There had been a part of him that feared this moment, a part that feared that there was still more to the story he wasn't ready to hear. But in that moment, as he looked at his daughter, he realized that this wasn't something to fear. This was the last step in bridging the gap between them, in understanding the full extent of her life, her choices, and everything she had been through. "What is it, Jessica?" His voice was quiet, filled with both concern and anticipation. Jessica paused, taking a deep breath. She had never been one to seek sympathy or to dwell on her past. But now, there was a part of her that needed to release the weight she had been carrying for so long. "After I left the SEALs," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, I was part of a mission that went wrong. Really wrong. And some people I cared about didn't make it out. It's something I've never been able to talk about." Mr. Conrad's heart tightened. He had known that her time in the military had been brutal, but hearing this, the realization that his daughter had faced such unimaginable loss was almost too much to process. She had never spoken of it, had never allowed him to see the depth of her pain. He had always seen her as the strong, quiet woman who never needed anyone. But now, hearing her voice crack with the weight of unspoken grief, he realized just how much she had kept hidden from him. "I didn't want you to see me like that," Jessica continued, her eyes focused on the floor as if afraid to meet his gaze. "I didn't want you to know the things I've seen, the things I've done. I thought if I kept it to myself, you wouldn't see me as broken. I didn't want you to look at me the way I saw myself." Mr. Conrad felt a pang of sorrow in his chest. It was a sorrow born not just of her pain, but of his own complicity in her silence. He had failed her, had failed to see her as the person she had become. And now, as the truth came pouring out, he was confronted with a depth of emotion he had never before experienced. He reached across the table, his hand trembling slightly as he placed it over hers. The simple gesture, one of comfort and connection, seemed to bridge the vast chasm between them. He squeezed her hand gently, as if trying to convey all the things he couldn't express with words. "I'm so sorry, Jessica," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have been there for you. I should have known, but I didn't. I was too blind, too focused on myself." Jessica lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. There was no anger in her gaze, no bitterness, just a quiet understanding. "It's not your fault, Dad," she replied softly. "You didn't know. I never let you in, and I thought I could handle it all on my own. But now I know that I don't have to. I don't have to keep carrying it alone anymore." The words hung in the air between them, charged with a kind of raw honesty that neither of them had ever shared before. For the first time in years, Mr. Conrad felt like he truly understood his daughter, not just as a figure in his life, but as a person with her own pain, her own strength, and her own journey. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything they had just shared settling over them like a blanket. But it wasn't a heavy silence. It was a silence of mutual understanding. of two people who had come to terms with the past and were ready to move forward, together. After a while, Mr. Conrad spoke again, his voice more certain now. "We're going to get through this, Jessica. Together. I may not have been the father you needed before, but I'll be the father you need now. I'm here for you, whatever you need." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Jessica smiled. A small, genuine smile that held the weight of everything she had been through, and everything she had just shared. "I know, Dad," she said softly. "And that's all I need. To know that you're here." In that moment, the gulf that had once separated them seemed to shrink, as if the pain of the past could finally start to heal. They still had a long way to go, a journey that would require patience, understanding, and time. But for the first time, Mr. Conrad felt like he was truly seeing his daughter. Not the idealized version he had built in his mind, but the real Jessica, the one who had faced battles both external and internal, the one who had been brave enough to carry it all alone for so long. As they sat there, side by side, Mr. Conrad realized that this was just the beginning of their healing. The truth had finally come out. And with it, there was a chance, no, a promise that their relationship could be rebuilt on a foundation of honesty, vulnerability, and shared strength. The days that followed were strangely calm, almost too calm for Mr. Conrad. He found himself reflecting on the new dynamic between him and Jessica, feeling a growing sense of hope for the future. But the world, it seemed, had other plans for them. Just as he began to think they were turning a corner, something else entered their lives, something that would forever change the course of their relationship and shake the very foundation of what they thought was reality. It started one ordinary afternoon. Mr. Conrad was sitting in his office, flipping through reports and finalizing business deals when he received an unexpected phone call. It was from an unknown number. He didn't recognize the area code, but for some reason he felt a strange sense of urgency. He answered the call, unsure of what to expect. "Mr. Conrad," the voice on the other end said, a calm yet authoritative tone cutting through the air. "This is Captain Hayes. I'm with an elite unit of the Navy SEALs, and I need to speak with your daughter immediately." The words felt like a punch to the gut. The mention of Jessica's past, of her service as a Navy SEAL, sent a chill down his spine. It had been weeks since their heart-to-heart, and while he knew she had a history filled with unimaginable experiences, the reality of it all had never truly sunk in. Now, hearing the voice of someone who shared that history, he realized that Jessica's past wasn't something that was just going to disappear. It was a part of her, a part that would always follow her, no matter how far removed she had tried to be from it. "Is she in danger?" Mr. Conrad's voice cracked with the fear he hadn't anticipated feeling. His protective instincts kicked in immediately, the same instincts that had always made him cautious, controlled, and ready to shield his family from harm. But this was different. This wasn't a business deal or a financial setback. This was about Jessica, his daughter, the woman who had bravely faced life on her own terms, a life he had never fully understood. And now it seemed that life was coming back to confront her. "We have reason to believe that a threat from her past has resurfaced," Captain Hayes continued. "We need her to assist us, and I need your permission to contact her directly." Mr. Conrad's heart began to race. He had known there were risks associated with Jessica's service, but he had never imagined they would reach into their lives like this. The walls of the mansion, the ones that had once made him feel untouchable, now felt like a fragile barrier between his family and the dangerous world Jessica had left behind. I don't know what to do," Mr. Conrad murmured, his mind whirling. "I haven't had time to process everything you just told me. My daughter's been through more than I can ever understand." "I understand," Captain Hayes said, his voice firm. "But I assure you, she's the only one who can help us with this. If you're willing to let her make that choice, I will arrange everything." The decision felt heavy, like it had the weight of 1,000 lives riding on it. Mr. Conrad knew this was no longer just about his own peace of mind. It was about Jessica's safety, her future, and her ability to face her past. He couldn't shield her from everything, no matter how much he wished he could. And as much as he wanted to pull her into the safety of his controlled, predictable world, he knew that was not the life she had chosen for herself. She had always been more than just a daughter to him. She was a warrior, a fighter, a woman of resilience he could barely comprehend. "I'll talk to her," Mr. Conrad finally said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. But I want you to understand this is her decision. I won't force her to do anything she doesn't want to. I understand, sir. I'll await your call. As Mr. Conrad hung up the phone, the weight of the conversation settled over him like a dark cloud. He sat back in his chair, taking a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. His mind was racing. What could this threat be? Who was after his daughter, and why? The questions swirled in his mind, each more unsettling than the last. But there was only one thing he knew for certain. The life he had built, the life he had fought for, was now under threat, not just by the outside world, but by the very history Jessica had tried to leave behind. He knew he couldn't protect her from everything. That much had become clear during their recent conversations. But this was different. This was a direct attack on the family, an invasion of the peace they had just begun to rebuild. He needed to act, and he needed to act fast. That evening, when Jessica returned home from a day spent running errands, Mr. Conrad was waiting for her in the drawing room. She walked in, her expression calm, yet he could see the glint of something in her eyes, the same intensity that had always been there. It was the look of someone who had lived through war, someone who had seen things that no one should have to, and yet there was a strength in her that Mr. Conrad could no longer ignore. "Jessica, we need to talk," he said, his voice low but urgent. She could hear the seriousness in his tone, and without hesitation she sat down beside him. "What's going on, Dad?" she asked, her voice steady, though there was a hint of concern beneath it. She knew something was wrong. The air was thick with the tension of unspoken truths. "There's been a call," Mr. Conrad began, choosing his words carefully. "A Navy SEAL named Captain Hayes contacted me. He says there's a threat from your past. Something has resurfaced and they need your help." Jessica's face didn't change, but Mr. Conrad could see the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She had always been good at hiding her emotions, but he could read her well enough now to know that this wasn't news she was ready to hear. "A threat?" she repeated quietly. "From my past?" Mr. Conrad nodded. "He wouldn't give me details, but he made it clear that you're the only one who can help them. He's waiting for you to make a decision." Jessica leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. "I knew this would happen," she said softly, almost to herself. "I knew my past would find me eventually." For a moment there was only silence between them. Mr. Conrad wanted to say something to comfort her, to ease her fear. But he knew better now. He had spent too long trying to shield her from the world, and he couldn't do that anymore. Jessica was her own person, strong and capable, and the woman who had been a Navy SEAL was far more than he had ever given her credit for. "I won't make this decision for you, Jessica," he said quietly. "But whatever you choose, know that I'm with you. I'm here." Her gaze softened, but only slightly. "I don't know if I'm ready to go back into that world," she admitted, her voice a mix of vulnerability and strength. "But I also can't ignore it. I've always known that this was part of me, and I can't run from it anymore." Mr. Conrad nodded, understanding more than ever before. The decision was hers, but he knew now that it was not just a decision about the past. It was about the future, about what kind of life she wanted to lead, and about the truth she had kept buried for so long. He could only stand by and watch, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. And as Jessica made her choice, as she stepped back into the world she had left behind, Mr. Conrad realized that the true strength of a family wasn't in the walls they built or the empire they created. It was in the willingness to stand together, no matter how far apart their worlds seemed. The days following Jessica's decision to re-enter the world she had once left behind were nothing short of transformative for both her and Mr. Conrad. What had started as a confrontation, an unexpected revelation of her past, had evolved into something far deeper. An understanding that stretched beyond father and daughter, beyond the roles they had once defined for one another. They had crossed a threshold, one that marked not just the unearthing of hidden truths, but a profound change in how they viewed themselves, each other, and the world around them. As Jessica prepared to leave, the weight of her decision settled heavily on both of them. There was a quiet intensity between them now, a bond forged through shared understanding, but also through the pain and acceptance of what had been left unsaid for so long. The emotional walls that had kept them apart for years seemed to have crumbled overnight. Jessica had allowed her father to see her, truly see her, for the first time in years. And though the past could never be fully erased, the future, it seemed, was theirs to shape. It was late in the evening when Mr. Conrad found himself standing alone in the living room, staring out the large windows that looked out over the sprawling estate. The estate that had once represented everything he had worked for, everything he had built, now felt almost inconsequential. The walls of marble and glass no longer offered the same protection they once had. The world had changed, and so had he. His daughter had made a choice that was beyond anything he could have expected. A choice that spoke not just of her bravery, but of her independence, a strength he had failed to recognize for so long. He thought back to the call from Captain Hayes, the conversation that had started this entire chain of events. It had been so sudden, so jarring, yet now it seemed almost inevitable. Jessica's past had always been with her, lurking just beneath the surface, and it had never truly been something she could escape. But the truth had been revealed, and in its wake, Jessica had shown a depth of character that Mr. Conrad could no longer ignore. As he stood there, lost in thought, the sound of footsteps approaching interrupted his reverie. Jessica entered the room, her presence both calm and assured, yet there was something in her eyes, a quiet sadness, a heaviness that had settled within her ever since she had made her decision. She had never been one to express vulnerability easily, but tonight something was different. She had made a decision that would take her back into the depths of a world she had tried to leave behind. And though she was resolute, the weight of it all had begun to settle on her. "Dad," she said softly, her voice steady yet laden with emotion, "I've thought about it. I've thought about what you said, and I know this is the right thing to do. I can't keep running from the past. I can't keep pretending like it never happened." Mr. Conrad turned to face her, his expression softening. "I never wanted you to have to face this again, Jessica. I wanted to protect you from all of it, from the danger, from the pain." He paused, his voice catching slightly. "But I see now that you've been strong enough to carry it all on your own. And I've been too blind to see that. I should have been there for you." Jessica shook her head, stepping closer to him. "It's not your fault, Dad. I never let you in. I never gave you the chance to see what I was going through. But that was my choice. I thought I could handle it alone. I thought I could bury it and move on. But it never really left. And now I have to face it." Mr. Conrad reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, his grip firm but comforting. "I don't know if I can protect you from what's coming," he said, his voice filled with a mix of pride and fear. "But I'll be here, Jessica. Whatever happens, I'll be here for you. I'm proud of the woman you've become, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." For a moment they stood there in silence, the weight of their conversation settling around them like a quiet storm. Neither of them knew exactly what the future would hold, but one thing was certain. This was the beginning of something new. Their relationship, once defined by distance and misunderstanding, had transformed into something stronger, something deeper, and in that moment, Mr. Conrad realized that the greatest strength was not in what you could control, but in what you were willing to protect, even if it meant facing the darkest parts of your past. "Thank you, Dad," Jessica said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've always needed to hear that." He smiled softly, his heart swelling with emotion. "You're my daughter, Jessica. I'll always be here." The next day, Jessica left. The team she had once been a part of was waiting for her, the mission they had prepared for now clear. It wasn't a mission of glory, of public recognition. It was a quiet, dangerous task that only someone with her experience could undertake. The threat that had resurfaced was real, and Jessica was the key to neutralizing it. But as she walked out the door, leaving her father standing in the grand hallway, there was no fear in her eyes, only determination. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that she would not be facing it alone. Mr. Conrad stood in the doorway watching her go. He had always been a man who built things, who created empires. But now, as he watched Jessica walk away, he understood that the greatest thing he could ever build was not wealth, but the foundation of trust, respect, and love with his daughter. It was a bond that no threat, no danger could ever break. As Jessica drove away, Mr. Conrad felt something shift within him. The mansion, the world he had carefully crafted, no longer felt like a fortress. It had never been about the walls or the material things. It had always been about the people who inhabited it, and now he understood that more than ever. He had spent so long building a life of success and control, but it was in these quiet moments, these moments of vulnerability, that he truly found his purpose. to be there for his family, to stand by them even in the darkest times. And for the first time in his life, Mr. Conrad realized that true strength wasn't about what you could protect from the world. It was about what you were willing to face, head on, together. As the night fell and the mansion grew quiet, Mr. Conrad found himself standing by the window, watching the stars above. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of his empire pressing down on him. Instead, he felt a quiet peace. He had done something he thought impossible. He had opened his heart to his daughter, and in doing so, had found something even more valuable than wealth. A bond that would endure. No matter what came next, the hours stretched into days, and each moment that passed without word from Jessica made Mr. Conrad's chest tighten with unease. The mansion, which had once felt like a sanctuary of success and safety, now seemed more like a hollow shell. He wandered through the hallways, lost in thought, the echoes of his past failures reverberating in his mind. He had tried to shield Jessica from the world's dangers, tried to shape her into a perfect reflection of the life he had worked so hard to build. But in doing so, he had lost sight of who she truly was, of the strength she carried inside of her. The phone call that came a few days later felt like the first breath of fresh air he had taken in weeks. The sound of the line ringing was a bitter reminder of how far apart they had been, and yet it was also a reminder that the connection they had fought for was worth holding on to. When the phone finally clicked, Mr. Conrad's heart raced, his breath shallow as he braced for the conversation. "Mr. Conrad." Captain Hayes's voice came through clear, but with an edge of urgency. "It's done. The threat has been neutralized, but I need to be honest with you. Jessica, she's been injured. It's not serious, but we need you here." The words hit Mr. Conrad like a physical blow. "Injured?" His voice cracked. "Is she all right?" "She's stable, but she's in no condition to make decisions right now. We've already arranged for her to return, but she's going to need support. We're bringing her back soon." Mr. Conrad didn't wait for another word. He didn't need to. His instincts had already kicked in. He grabbed his coat, his hands trembling as he prepared to leave. The thought of Jessica injured hurt more than he could express. All the progress they had made, all the healing between them, seemed like it could be shattered in an instant. By the time he arrived at the facility where Jessica had been taken, the weight of his anxiety was almost unbearable. His mind raced with images of her, the girl he had known, the woman who had faced dangers he could never comprehend. And now she was lying somewhere, hurt, vulnerable. He had failed to protect her, failed to keep her safe from the very world he had always tried to shield her from. But as he walked into the quiet room where Jessica was recovering, a strange calm washed over him. There she was, sitting up in bed, her head wrapped in bandages, but there was no fear in her eyes. There was no pain. Instead, there was something different, a quiet strength, the same strength he had seen in her ever since she had first opened up to him. She was still Jessica, the woman he had failed to see all those years, and yet she had become something even greater than that. She was the embodiment of resilience, of someone who had faced the hardest moments of her life and come out stronger. "Jessica," Mr. Conrad whispered, his voice shaky as he approached the bed. "I should have been there. I should have—" She cut him off with a smile, one that, despite the pain, reached all the way to her eyes. "You're here now, Dad," she said softly, her voice strong but tender. "And that's all that matters." Mr. Conrad sat beside her, unable to hold back the rush of emotions that flooded him. For so long he had seen himself as the protector, the one who kept his family safe from the outside world. But in that moment he realized that Jessica had always been her own protector. She had fought for herself, for those she loved, and for her own sense of purpose. He hadn't understood it, hadn't wanted to, but now he saw it clearly. Jessica was not just his daughter. She was a force unto herself, a force that had carried the weight of the world without ever asking for help. "I'm sorry, Jessica," he said, his voice cracking. "I never understood. I thought I could fix everything. But the truth is, I couldn't even see you for who you really were. I thought you were just a girl I had to protect. But you've always been so much more than that." Jessica looked at him with a soft, knowing smile, the same smile that had warmed his heart through all the years of their distance. "You don't need to protect me, Dad. You just need to be there. That's all." The words hung between them, more powerful than any apology or declaration of love he could have ever offered. For the first time in their lives, Mr. Conrad truly saw his daughter, not as a reflection of his success, not as someone he needed to protect, but as a woman who had lived through things he couldn't imagine and had emerged stronger for it. She had carved her own path, faced the darkest parts of the world, and yet here she was, still standing. As the days passed, Mr. Conrad stayed by Jessica's side, never once leaving her. The doctors had assured him that the physical wounds would heal, but what mattered more now was the emotional journey they both had ahead. This injury, this moment of crisis, was a reminder that their relationship could never return to what it once was. There was no going back to the man he had been, to the father who had tried to protect his daughter from the world. The only way forward was together, with mutual understanding, respect, and trust. It was a slow journey, one that required patience and time. But as Mr. Conrad sat with Jessica day after day, he began to understand something crucial. His empire, his wealth, his name, none of that mattered in the end. The only thing that mattered was the people who had stood by him, who had loved him, and who had trusted him, even when he had failed to see them for who they were. By the time Jessica was strong enough to return home, the mansion no longer felt like the cold, empty space it once had. There was life in it now, a life that was built not on material wealth or social standing, but on something far more enduring, the bond between father and daughter. Mr. Conrad had finally come to understand the true measure of strength, not in the walls he had built around his family, but in the love they shared, and in the courage they each had to face the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. When Jessica walked through the door, her step steady and confident, Mr. Conrad felt a sense of pride that he had never known before, not because of anything he had done, but because of everything she had done for herself. She had faced the darkest parts of her past, and yet she had never stopped moving forward. And now, together, they were moving forward as well, into a future where the past could no longer hold them back. In that moment, as father and daughter stood side by side, Mr. Conrad knew that their journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, more obstacles to face, but for the first time he felt ready. Ready to be the father she needed, ready to face the world together, no longer as a man who had tried to control everything, but as a man who had learned the true meaning of strength, the ability to stand by those you love no matter what comes next.